The moment someone tows your boat off your dock, they're telling you they think they own your life. The metallic rattle of a tow chain snapped me awake before sunrise. At first, I thought it was thunder rolling across the lake. Then I heard it again. Steel scraping against aluminum. Slow. Deliberate. Wrong. I rolled out of bed and crossed the hardwood floor barefoot, the cool boards pressing against my feet as the faint smell of lake water drifted through the cracked bedroom window. My house sits less than 30 feet from the shoreline, close enough that I can hear the water lap against the dock on calm mornings. Usually that sound is peaceful. That morning, it felt like a warning. I stepped onto the back deck and immediately saw flashing amber lights reflecting across the dark water. My stomach dropped. A tow truck sat at the end of my private dock. Its diesel engine growled through the morning fog, while a cable stretched from the truck down toward my base boat. My Ranger Z521. $85,000 worth of fiberglass, electronics, and memories. The boat my father and I spent years fishing from. The boat tied legally to slip number 1 at my marina, and someone was dragging it out of the water. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with wet cedar and lake mud as I jogged down the dock. My pulse hammered in my ears. Halfway there, I spotted her. Brenda Whitmore, HOA president. White windbreaker. Perfectly styled blonde hair. Coffee tumbler in one hand. Clipboard in the other. She stood at the end of my dock like she owned the place. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I shouted. The tow operator froze. Brenda didn't. She took a sip of coffee and smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not an apologetic smile. The kind of smile people wear when they think they've already won. "Enforcing marina regulations," she said. "This vessel is being removed from community property." Community property. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. The dock beneath her feet had been in my family longer than she'd been alive. The lake surrounding us had carried my last name for nearly 70 years. But Brenda looked completely confident, like she genuinely believed every word coming out of her mouth. That's what made her dangerous. Most bullies know they're crossing a line. Brenda thought she was drawing one. "You're towing my boat from my dock," I said. "Correction," she replied. "The HOA marina has authority over all slips." The morning air felt colder somehow. Around us, lights flickered on in lakefront homes. Curtains moved. Neighbors watched from kitchen windows. Nobody said a word. They just watched. And that told me everything. Brenda had been selling this story for a while. People believed her. They believed the HOA controlled the marina. They believed the HOA controlled the lake. They believed Brenda. What none of them knew was that this wasn't just a dispute over a boat slip. It wasn't even a dispute over a dock. Hidden inside county records, water rights agreements, and 70-year-old property deeds was a truth so much bigger than any of them realized. Because while Brenda was busy towing my base boat, planning her little marina takeover, and convincing an entire community that she ruled the shoreline, she had overlooked one tiny detail. She wasn't standing on HOA property. She wasn't standing on community property. She was standing on mine. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The tow operator looked from Brenda to me like he had just realized he had stepped into a dispute a lot bigger than a parking violation. The lake sat perfectly still behind him, a sheet of dark glass stretching nearly 300 acres toward the tree line on the opposite shore. A pair of herons lifted off from the reeds, their wings cutting silently through the morning mist. I remember looking out across that water and thinking about my grandfather. Because none of this started with an HOA. None of this started with Brenda. It started with a man named Walter Calloway and a patch of rocky farmland nobody else wanted. Back in 1954, my grandfather bought this property for less than the price of a new pickup truck. Most people thought he was crazy. The land flooded every spring. The soil was poor. The nearest town was 20 miles away. But he saw something nobody else saw. Water, opportunity, and a future. Over the next decade, he worked every spare hour building what eventually became Callaway Lake. He partnered with county engineers, secured permits, expanded the shoreline, reinforced the dam, and slowly transformed a forgotten piece of land into one of the most desirable waterfront communities in the county. The smell of fresh-cut cedar and diesel fuel became part of family history. My father grew up helping maintain the shoreline. I grew up doing the same. Some of my earliest memories are standing on those docks with a fishing rod in my hands while my father pointed across the water explaining property boundaries most people never noticed. He used to tell me something that sounded boring when I was 10 years old. Never confuse a house near the lake with ownership of the lake. At the time, I did not understand what he meant. Years later, I understood perfectly. During the housing boom, developers came calling. They wanted waterfront lots. My family sold sections of shoreline for residential construction. One neighborhood became two. Two became four. Eventually, Lakeview shores appeared. Beautiful homes. Expensive boats. Perfect lawns. Families who loved living on the water. But every contract contained the same condition. The homeowners owned their land. My family retained ownership of the lake, the marina rights, the shoreline easements, and every commercial boat slip. Most residents never paid attention to those details. They bought a view. They bought access. They bought a lifestyle. The paperwork stayed buried inside closing documents and county records. For decades, that arrangement worked perfectly. Then Brenda Whitmore became HOA president. At first, she seemed harmless, organized, ambitious, the type of person who volunteered for committees and always arrived 10 minutes early to meetings. But over time, something changed. She stopped acting like a representative. She started acting like an owner. New marina policies appeared. New parking regulations followed. Then came boat registration requirements, dock inspections, slip fees, approval forms. Every year, the HOA expanded its authority a little farther. Every year, fewer people questioned it. Standing there that morning, watching Brenda supervise the removal of my boat from property my family had maintained for 70 years, I realized just how far that illusion had spread. She did not see herself as someone breaking the rules. She genuinely believed she was enforcing them. And that belief was about to become the biggest mistake of her life. The tow truck finally stopped moving when I told the operator he might want to verify the ownership records before going any farther. He looked relieved to have an excuse. Brenda looked annoyed. That difference told me everything. She wanted compliance, not facts. By 8 o'clock that morning, the marina parking lot was full of residents pretending they had come down for an early walk. Coffee cups in hand, sunglasses on. Conversations whispered just loudly enough to be overheard. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the cool air while pontoon boats rocked gently against their slips. Brenda stood near the marina office greeting people like a politician on election day. Watching her work, a crowd was honestly impressive. She knew every name, every anniversary, every family dog. She made people feel included right before convincing them to give away a little more control. That had become her specialty. 5 years earlier, the HOA mostly handled landscaping, pool maintenance, and neighborhood events. Nobody paid much attention. Then Brenda launched what she called the Lake Improvement Initiative. It sounded harmless. Everybody loves improvements. New signage appeared around the shoreline. Then new rules. Then new fees. Residents were told the marina needed centralized management. Boat registrations became mandatory. Slip assignments were reorganized. New access badges were issued. Every step seemed small by itself. Together, they created something entirely different. A private governing system that slowly replaced ownership with permission. The strange part was how willingly people accepted it. Most residents had demanding jobs. Doctors, contractors, business owners. They did not want to spend evenings reading bylaws or county records. Brenda did. She practically lived for it. While everyone else was enjoying weekends on the water, she was collecting authority one committee vote at a time. I first noticed the shift 2 years earlier during a marina meeting. A retired neighbor named Frank Reynolds asked why the HOA was collecting docking fees when maintenance costs had not changed. It was a reasonable question. Brenda answered with a 20-minute presentation full of charts, projections, and legal language. By the end, half the room forgot what Frank had asked. The other half assumed she knew what she was doing. That became the pattern. Questions disappeared beneath paperwork. Objections drowned under procedure. Every year, the HOA budget grew larger. Every year, Brenda's influence expanded. Eventually, people stopped saying things like the neighborhood marina and started saying the HOA marina. One word changed. One assumption followed. The transformation was subtle enough that most people never noticed it happening. I noticed. My attorney noticed. A few longtime residents noticed. But nobody considered it an emergency because nobody imagined the situation would go this far. Then came the announcement that changed everything. 6 months before the morning of the tow incident, Brenda unveiled her biggest project yet. A luxury marina expansion. New floating docks. Additional boat slips. Premium memberships. Exclusive waterfront events. Residents applauded. Property values would rise. Amenities would improve. Everybody loved the idea. There was only one problem. The HOA did not actually possess the authority required to build any of it. Brenda either did not know that fact or believed nobody would ever challenge her. Standing there beside the water that morning, watching neighbors gather around her like she was the unquestioned ruler of the shoreline, I realized she had already started believing her own story. And people who believe their own stories are usually the last ones to see the truth coming. The marina expansion proposal moved fast. Faster than any project I had seen in years. Within a month of announcing it, Brenda had architectural renderings hanging inside the clubhouse. Glossy posters showed new floating docks stretching into the lake, covered picnic areas, upgraded boat launches, and rows of premium slips lined with expensive wake boats. Residents loved it. Every meeting felt more like a sales presentation than a discussion. The smell of fresh pastries and coffee filled the clubhouse, while people admired artist renderings taped to easels. Brenda stood at the front of the room, smiling like she had personally discovered waterfront living. Whenever someone questioned costs, she had an answer ready. Whenever someone asked about permits, she brushed it aside with confident assurances. The project was already becoming part of the community's future before anyone verified whether the HOA actually had the authority to build it. I attended every meeting. Mostly I listened. The more Brenda talked, the more interesting the situation became. She kept referring to the marina as an HOA asset. She called the shoreline a community resource. She even started describing the water itself as part of the neighborhood infrastructure. Every time I heard those phrases, I made notes. Because words matter, especially when they eventually appear in official records. Then came the fees. First there was a marina improvement assessment, then a slip reservation fee, then a waterfront enhancement contribution. The names changed, but the results stayed the same. More money flowed into HOA accounts. Residents paid because they believed the project would increase property values. Nobody wanted to be the person standing in the way of progress. By late summer, surveyors appeared along the shoreline. Wooden stakes popped up near the marina. Contractors visited the property. Brenda walked them around like a developer showing off land she owned. One afternoon, I watched from my dock as she pointed across the water explaining where new structures would eventually go. The breeze carried fragments of conversation across the lake. Every sentence sounded more confident than the last. There was only one problem. None of the approvals she promised had actually been issued. I knew that because I checked. Years earlier, my father taught me something important. Never argue with assumptions when documents exist. So instead of confronting Brenda publicly, I started making phone calls. County offices, planning departments, water management agencies. What I learned surprised even me. No finalized marina expansion permit existed. No approved shoreline modification request existed. No completed authorization for additional slips existed. Yet the HOA had already started collecting money and publicly presenting the project as inevitable. That discovery should have made me angry. Instead, it made me curious. Because mistakes happen, oversights happen, but this felt different. The deeper I looked, the more it seemed like Brenda genuinely believed approval was simply a formality, as if ownership and authority were the same thing, as if confidence could replace paperwork. Then came the letter. A certified envelope appeared in my mailbox 3 weeks before the tow incident. Inside was an official notice informing me that slip number 1 would be reassigned under the new marina management structure. My slip, my dock, my boat. The paper crackled in my hands as I read it twice. Then a third time. Across the top sat the HOA logo. Across the bottom sat Brenda's signature. That was the moment I realized this was no longer just an ambitious community project. Brenda had started acting on assumptions she could not legally support, and she was about to push those assumptions farther than she ever should have. I responded to the notice the same way my father would have. Calmly, professionally, with documentation. The morning after receiving the reassignment letter, I drove into town and met with my attorney. The smell of old paper and fresh copier toner filled the conference room while we spread property maps across a long oak table. Every line on those maps told the same story. The dock sat on land controlled through agreements tied directly to my family's holdings. The marina easements were older than the HOA itself. Nothing in the notice matched the actual records. My attorney read the letter twice, leaned back in his chair, and gave a small shake of his head. "This is aggressive," he said. but it is also useful. Useful was not the word I expected. He explained that every new letter, every policy, every signed directive created a paper trail. If Brenda continued acting beyond her authority, she would eventually document the entire problem herself. That advice changed everything. Instead of escalating publicly, I started collecting records, emails, meeting minutes, financial reports, marina notices. Every document went into a file cabinet in my home office. The drawer became so full that the metal rails groaned every time I opened it. Meanwhile, the HOA accelerated its plans. Residents received newsletters announcing future marina upgrades. Reservation lists opened for premium slips that did not exist yet. Deposits started flowing in. People were excited. Some even stopped by my dock to tell me how wonderful the expansion would be. I listened politely. Most had no idea there were unresolved ownership questions beneath the surface. They trusted Brenda because she sounded certain. Confidence can be surprisingly persuasive when nobody checks the details. Then the pressure shifted directly onto me. Violation notices started appearing. One claimed my boat registration paperwork was incomplete. Another alleged my slip assignment required reevaluation. A third informed me that future access would be subject to HOA marina review. The language grew bolder each month. Reading those letters felt like watching someone slowly redraw a map while pretending the borders had always existed. The strange part was that Brenda never seemed angry. She remained perfectly pleasant. At meetings, she smiled. She asked about people's families. She organized community events that made the situation harder for many residents to recognize. They saw friendliness. I saw expansion. Every conversation seemed to move authority 1 inch farther down the shoreline. By early spring, the marina office walls displayed updated renderings showing additional slips extending into sections of water the HOA had never controlled. Contractors continued visiting the property. Survey markers appeared and disappeared. New budget projections circulated through email chains. The entire project developed momentum of its own. Momentum can be dangerous because people eventually stop asking whether something should happen and start assuming it will happen. Then came the board meeting that changed the tone completely. Brenda stood before a packed room and announced that all existing slip assignments would be reviewed under a new management framework. Applause followed. Residents believed they were hearing about modernization. I heard something else. I heard a person preparing to exercise authority she had never actually verified. Sitting in the back row, listening to the sound of folding chairs and polite applause echo through the clubhouse, I realized something important. Brenda was no longer testing boundaries. She had already crossed them. The only question left was how far she planned to go before reality finally caught up with her. 3 days after the towing incident, I found myself standing inside the county records building, surrounded by shelves that smelled like dust, paper, and 70 years of local history. Most people never visit places like that unless something has gone terribly wrong. I was there because something felt too easy. Brenda had acted with a level of confidence that bothered me. Confidence usually comes from either knowledge or assumptions. I needed to know which one I was dealing with. An elderly clerk named Martha helped me pull archived files connected to the original development agreements around the lake. Cardboard boxes arrived on a rolling cart, their edges worn smooth by decades of handling. Inside were surveys, engineering reports, permit applications, easement maps, shoreline agreements, and stacks of correspondence dating back to my grandfather's era. For hours I sat beneath fluorescent lights, turning page after page, while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. Then I found it. Actually, I found several things. The first was an original shoreline management agreement signed nearly 40 years earlier. The second was a series of amendments connected to commercial marina operations. But the third document made me stop reading and start smiling. My grandfather had not simply retained ownership rights to the lake. He had structured the entire marina system around a separate authorization framework tied to the water itself. Every slip, every dock expansion, every commercial marina improvement, every future modification required approval through a licensing authority connected directly to the original ownership entity. Callaway Holdings, my family's company. I read the language 3 times just to make sure I was not imagining it. The lake ownership was important. The Marina Licensing Authority was far more important. Suddenly dozens of things made sense. The missing permits, the incomplete approvals, the vague answers from county departments. Brenda had been acting as though operational control automatically created legal authority. It did not. Not even close. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the glass while I continued digging. The deeper I went, the more remarkable the situation became. The proposed marina expansion had never completed the final authorization process. Several required approvals depended on permissions that had never been issued. Yet residents were already paying fees. Contractors were already discussing construction schedules. Premium slips were already being marketed. The entire project rested on assumptions stacked on top of assumptions. That was the moment the situation changed for me. Up until then, I had been defending my property. Now I realized something much larger was happening. Brenda was building an entire system on a foundation that did not legally exist. The most surprising part was that she appeared completely unaware of it. Back at home that evening, I spread copies of the documents across my dining room table. The smell of lake water drifted through the screened porch, while the setting sun painted the surface of the lake orange and gold. My attorney reviewed everything over a video call. Halfway through the meeting, he removed his glasses and laughed. Not because it was funny, because the implications were enormous. "Ethan," he said, "if these records are accurate, the marina expansion cannot move forward without your approval." I looked out towards slip number 1 where my boat sat secured exactly where it belonged. Across the shoreline, lights from waterfront homes reflected off the water. Most residents had no idea what was coming. Neither did Brenda. But for the first time since this whole mess started, I could finally see the shape of the endgame. And it was a lot bigger than a boat slip. Once I understood what those records actually meant, my entire approach changed. Most people assume the moment you discover a winning hand, you slam it down on the table. That is exactly what Brenda expected me to do. She expected angry emails, emergency meetings, public arguments. Instead, I did nothing. At least, that is what it looked like from the outside. The lake settled back into its normal rhythm. Early morning fishing boats drifted through the mist. Pontoon owners spent weekends cruising along the shoreline. The smell of sunscreen, gasoline, and fresh-cut grass returned with the warmer weather. Life around the water looked completely normal. Behind the scenes, I became a full-time observer. Every HOA newsletter went into a file. Every board meeting was recorded through publicly available minutes. Every marina announcement was saved. Every new fee structure was documented. The folders on my office computer multiplied week after week. Meanwhile, Brenda became more ambitious. The proposed marina expansion evolved into a full marketing campaign. Premium waterfront packages were advertised. Waiting lists appeared. Residents were encouraged to reserve future slips before construction even began. Some families paid deposits months in advance. The more successful the program became, the more confident Brenda appeared. During one meeting, she stood in front of a projection screen showing future marina revenue estimates. The room erupted in applause. Looking around, I realized most people genuinely believed they were witnessing strong leadership. They had no idea they were watching someone build a skyscraper on top of paperwork that had never been approved. My attorney agreed with the strategy. Every week, we reviewed new documents together. Every week, the evidence became stronger. Financial reports showed revenue being collected for facilities that did not yet legally exist. Marketing materials described expansion plans still missing key authorizations. Internal communications referred to operational rights that had never actually been granted. Nobody was fabricating anything. Nobody was hiding documents. The truth was sitting in plain sight. The problem was that nobody bothered comparing the claims to the underlying records. One evening, nearly 2 months after the towing incident, I attended another HOA meeting. The clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs filled every corner of the room. Ceiling fans hummed overhead while residents flipped through printed presentations describing the future of the marina. Brenda looked completely at ease. She walked through charts, timelines, and construction schedules with the confidence of someone unveiling a finished project rather than a proposal. Then she announced something that nearly made me laugh out loud. Construction planning would begin immediately following final administrative approval. Administrative approval. The phrase hung in the air like a loose thread. Most people ignored it. I did not, because I knew exactly what those words really meant. She was talking about permissions she still did not possess. As the meeting ended, neighbors congratulated her. People discussed where they hoped their future slips would be located. Children ran across the lawn outside while the sun disappeared behind the lake. Standing there beneath the orange glow reflecting off the water, I realized Brenda had unknowingly done something incredibly useful. She had documented every step herself, every assumption, every promise, every unauthorized expansion of authority. The evidence no longer lived inside old county archives. It lived inside her own records. And the closer she moved toward launching her dream marina project, the closer she moved toward discovering who actually controlled its future. The county hearing was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in late September. By noon, the parking lot outside the administration building was already full. Residents from Lakeview Shores arrived carrying folders, notebooks, and expectations. Most believed they were about to hear final updates regarding the marina expansion. Some expected construction timelines. Others expected permit approvals. Brenda looked especially confident. She walked through the lobby greeting people by name, smiling, shaking hands, and talking about the future of the waterfront. The scent of polished wood and fresh coffee filled the building while conversations echoed off the tile floors. From a distance, she looked like someone preparing to celebrate a victory. I arrived carrying a single leather binder. Nothing more. My attorney met me near the hearing room entrance and nodded toward the crowd gathering around Brenda. "Looks like she thinks today is going well," he said quietly. I glanced across the room. "For now," I replied. The hearing room itself was larger than I expected. Long tables stretched across the front beneath bright overhead lights. Representatives from planning departments, shoreline management offices, and county administration occupied the front row. Residents filled the gallery seats behind them. The low hum of conversation faded when the meeting began. Brenda spoke first. She delivered a polished presentation outlining marina improvements, projected benefits, estimated revenue, and community enhancements. Slide after slide appeared on the screen. New docks, additional slips, expanded facilities. Residents nodded along. Several even applauded when she finished. Then the county moderator asked a simple question. "Before moving forward, can we confirm final authorization status?" The room became quiet. Brenda answered confidently. She explained that administrative approvals were pending and expected shortly. The moderator turned toward me. "Mr. Calloway, you requested time on today's agenda regarding authorization records." I stood up. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor. Every eye in the room shifted in my direction. I opened the binder and placed several documents on the table. The sound of paper sliding across polished wood seemed unusually loud. Then I began walking through the records. Original ownership agreements, shoreline easements, marina licensing provisions, historical amendments, county filings. Each document connected to the next. Each page removed another assumption. Within minutes, the room grew noticeably quieter. Residents stopped taking notes. Officials leaned forward. Brenda's expression changed for the first time all afternoon. Not panic, confusion. The kind of confusion that appears when reality refuses to match expectation. The moderator reviewed the records carefully. So did the county attorney. Additional documents were requested. More files were examined. Nearly an hour passed. Finally, the conclusion arrived. The marina expansion could not proceed without licensing authorization tied directly to Callaway Holdings. Existing permissions were incomplete. Future construction approvals remained unresolved. Several operational assumptions required immediate review. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody argued. The facts simply settled into the room like an anchor dropping into deep water. Across the audience, I watched residents slowly piece together what had happened. They had not been lied to. They had been led forward on assumptions that were never verified. Brenda sat perfectly still. The confidence that had carried her through months of meetings suddenly seemed very far away. And for the first time since this entire situation began, everyone in the room understood the same thing. The future of the marina had never belonged to the HOA. It depended on a signature that had not yet been given. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet. No dramatic confrontations. No shouting matches. Just paperwork doing what paperwork eventually does when people finally read it. County officials completed their review. Additional meetings were held. Financial records were examined. Licensing requirements were clarified. By the end of October, the outcome was impossible to ignore. The marina expansion project was suspended pending proper authorization. Future slip construction stopped. Several proposed programs were withdrawn. Residents who had paid deposits received updates explaining that timelines would need to be reconsidered. The reaction around the lake was not anger. It was confusion. People wanted to know how something so important had moved so far without anyone noticing the missing pieces. The answer turned out to be simple. Everyone assumed somebody else had already checked. One cool Saturday morning, I walked down to the marina just after sunrise. The smell of damp wood and lake water drifted through the air. A light breeze pushed small ripples across the surface while gulls circled overhead. For the first time in months, the shoreline felt peaceful. My base boat sat exactly where it belonged in slip number 1. The aluminum rails reflected the morning light. The same slip that had started this entire mess now looked almost ordinary again. That was the funny thing about justice. When it finally arrives, it often looks less dramatic than people expect. A few residents approached me over the following days. Some apologized for assuming the HOA controlled things it never actually controlled. Others admitted they had never read the documents governing the lake. Most simply wanted clarity, so I gave it to them. I met with homeowners, shared records, explained the history of the lake, showed them how the marina system actually worked. Once people understood the facts, the tension faded surprisingly fast. The community did not need another fight. It needed transparency. Eventually, a new agreement emerged. Marina operations would continue under properly documented authority. Future improvements could still happen, but only through the correct approval process. Residents would have access. The lake would remain protected. The rules would finally match the records. As for Brenda, she resigned from the Marina Committee several months later. We never became friends, but we did have one brief conversation near the shoreline before winter arrived. The lake was calm that afternoon. The air smelled faintly of cedar and cold water. She looked out across the marina and shook her head. "I really thought I was helping," she said quietly. I believed her. That was the tragedy of the whole situation. Ambition is not always malicious. Sometimes it simply outruns reality. I wished her well and walked back toward my dock. That evening, I sat alone on the end of the pier watching the sunset paint the water gold. The same lake my grandfather built. The same shoreline my father taught me to respect. The same marina that had nearly become something entirely different. The lights from the waterfront homes slowly appeared one by one across the water. Families gathered for dinner. Boats rested quietly in their slips. Everything looked normal again. But I knew something had changed. Not because I won. Not because someone else lost. Because the truth finally ended up where it belonged. My grandfather used to say that ownership is not about what you can take. It is about what you are willing to protect. Looking across the lake that night, I finally understood exactly what he meant. Some people thought they owned the marina because they managed it. Some thought they controlled the shoreline because they regulated it. But in the end, the water never cared about assumptions. The records remained the records. The facts remained the facts. And the lake remained exactly what it had always been.